And we are live. Hello, all you BC Wrestle Pod nerds out there. Welcome to another episode of the BC Wrestle Pod podcast. Still trying to workshop this point. It has been a day, but I am super happy to be here. And we are here with another great podcast for you today. There's LGBT plus representation in wrestling. We're going to try to get through this. It is a heat wave right now. My internet is fighting everything. Hi, guys. I am joined this episode by First TNA Reviews. Andrew is in the house, so thank you for being here this evening, my friend. Love to see it. You can also find this individual on the ROH panel. So, Jesse, thank you for being here. We're professionals, I swear. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, also filling out the Dynamite reviews and sometime owing me favors for TNA reviews as well. JBL is in the house, gentlemen. So thank you so much for being here. The ROH boys have taken over the podcast. We'll find out if this was a good idea or not. No, I mean, realistically, probably not, but it's okay. But welcome to another episode of the BC WrestlePod podcast. Like I carded below says, we are celebrating a very special month here. And we're going to talk all the wrestling and just, see where this conversation leads, good and bad. It is the month of Pride, but more importantly, talked a lot about within the internet wrestling community and review conversation this evening, because this is going to be a topic that is geared towards certain things that some people may not like. Let's just do this right now.
Important notice.
Yes, we are thrilled. Yes. Warning. We are thrilled to invite you to dive into the world of wrestling with us at BC WrestlePod. Your opinions and insights are what make our wrestling community vibrant and diverse. Whether you are a longtime fan or new to the scene, your perspective is valuable. However, when sharing thoughts or commenting, let's remember to keep the conversations respectful and supportive. Wrestling is a passion we all share, and it's in our spirited discussions that we learn and grow together. So let's celebrate matches and maybe even debate the outcomes with kindness and respect. Short version of it, like what you like, don't be a dick. That is all I ask for you. Be respectful in the comments, don't be rude. So there we go. Now that we've gotten that out of the way. So gentlemen, this episode particular conversation is going to be as it is the month of Pride, our topic for this episode is we're going to be talking about all the things, I guess I could say this word, queer in terms of wrestling and the representation of the community within wrestling. Some of the folks that either have set a path and a trail for all the wrestlers today or are currently doing the dang thing out there. Any storylines or, moments that have highlighted this representation, but also talking about the current challenges that are still faced with this representation in wrestling and how the companies can essentially grow and do better when it comes to this representation. So all of us are representations of different eras of wrestling, so we have seen a lot.
You're calling me old?
When it comes to certain things.
No, just me. That's basically what it is.
Folks that we have kind of talked. I mean, if you want to go, you know what, JVL, let's start with you. So,
God's what? No, it's a delay enough as it is. I don't know what you're talking about at this point. All I've gotten so far is.
You love to see it. Well, anyways, I'm gonna try to
the old man before he has to go to bed.
Well, I mean, okay. So before we get into specifics, JVL, what has been your experience when it comes to the representation and whatnot with certain wrestlers, with storylines, things like that? Because there have been some good, but let's also be real. There have also been some maybe not so great ones either.
There's been a whole lot of bad.
I mean, you've said it, Jesse. I'm one of the older men here that grew up in the late 80s, early 90s watching as, they had effeminate gay portrayals of certain characters. They were always heels. They were always terrible in the ring. Meanwhile, you would have things like some of the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers or people like that who would, be flamboyant, and they would say flamboyant to make sure that you knew it wasn't that they were openly queer, openly gay, anything else. At the same time, the only kind of thing you knew about if you were in the know during those times were the scandals involving Pat Patterson and the other Garvin brother, I can't remember his name. I had it right here. Terry Garvin, the whole thing with the Ring Boy scandal, the stuff like that. You would hear about that going on. So the representation was never good, and that came from partially the carny lifestyle that these people came from, but also, and not to generalize too much, it was, especially in the Southern territories, good old boy wrestling. These were our big heroes, and it's a thing where like you just didn't see it, and so it's been until the modern day where you've even gotten mention of it, let alone kind of acceptance of it in certain ways, and it also, I think, is in a better way because it's not the only thing that a character is tied to. It's basically based around, this is my character and my wrestler. Oh, and I happen to be openly homosexual or bisexual or pansexual or whatever it ends up happening to be. And that's my personal life. But because everyone's in the know of who you are as a person, they understand that versus it was always part of kayfabe. Like, oh, if you're portraying a gay person on screen, you may be being asked to do the stereotype to elicit that response, which is never a good thing. That's where I am with it. I know Mikey is trying to furiously figure out what else is going on backstage there, and we're fixing as we're sitting. So
I'll jump in here and just kind of keep going with that thought there. It is a lot better than what it
Andrew.
was, but it still has a very, very long way to go to the point where there are shows that are much more inclusive, movies much more inclusive now, which is good. This form of entertainment needs to follow that trend where it's just don't make it a story. It doesn't need to be called out. It doesn't affect whether or not they were a good wrestler or a good entertainer or not. It's just part of their personal life. And while I like that we're showing it to show inclusion and acceptance and that it's normal, it is a completely normal thing. Let's not make it part of a story. Let's not build a story around it because we don't do it with, cis straight wrestlers. So why are we doing it with somebody who's queer, who's gay, who's trans, anything like that?
Yeah, I was talking to Mikey not yesterday, 2 days ago, when we were doing the reviews in between the shows, and I talked about the first thing that came to my mind when I thought about kind of this in professional wrestling, and it's not the first thing I remember seeing, but it's the thing that sticks out the most to me was the whole Billy and Chuck thing. And I remember watching that at the time because I think that was like early 2000s, and for what wrestling was at that point and what we were getting, it felt like it was the best it was being handled for where we were in that world, because it's a world of athletes, it's a world of predominantly run by at least straight presenting men. Unfortunately, in those worlds, a lot of the people that may not be straight are presenting themselves that way because they feel like they have to hide it because of the people around them. But looking at it now, like you had kind of brought up, Jesse, is we have a lot of wrestlers out there who their personal lives are not necessarily their character. And that's kind of how it was done in the past, was like, a great example of this is Anthony Bowens. He's out, and it's something that a lot of, fans know about and all that kind of stuff. But it's not what his character revolves around, being this phenomenal athlete who's a phenomenal wrestler. He's one half of this great tag team, and it's not his identity. But at the same time, it's not something that he has to hide as part of his personal life, just like all of the other wrestlers' personal lives. And I don't mind so much if we saw storylines that tied into those things, because we do see sometimes, we see real life couples, play parts in stories. I mean, right now we've got, oh my goodness, why am I blanking on their names? Daddy Magic, or not Daddy Magic, it's Cool Hand Ange and Ruby Soho. We're hearing about their whole personal life and all that kind of stuff. So I don't mind so much if it's something that we hear about and it kind of plays into the world, but it doesn't become a caricature or a stereotype, or it becomes all that their character and their personality is about. It's made it where it's part of the world, and it's, just as accepting as everything else. And I think it's made it to where the people that they're working with and the people that are in that, sphere are more open and more supportive too. Something else we talked about was Nyla Rose getting, harassed by, like I
the
said,
entire state of Oklahoma.
Well, yeah. And specifically, people that say they're fans, but, they're just real life trolls, and having other performers, other fans, other production people like step up and protect, and stand up for those people is super important, because it's not just one, it's one thing to be like, oh, okay, well, I don't mind, but it's more important to, not treat them as, someone you don't care about, that you respect them for who they are. And, I think it's helping change not just how people are being presented.
Well, Andrew, the other thing that you brought up is the Billy and Chuck thing, which that's on a whole different level in a lot of reasons, because they got basically farther down the rabbit hole with that than they expected when GLAAD came out to actually like promote this.
Yeah.
And like I would have not loved, but I would have wanted to see what those meetings were like backstage with all the straight white men in that boardroom. What do we do about this? Because now we know we're playing this up as a comedy ending, and they're playing it as like the ambiguously gay duo, but now they've got backing from GLAAD, and we've set up this whole wedding thing. Like, were they trolling them on purpose because they didn't actually believe in what they were saying there at that point? It was a real black eye on them, more than even a lot of the other stuff might have been.
I mean, for all the good it did that time, we also had things like Eric Bischoff bringing out the lesbians to get destroyed by 3-minute warning, which I think was in a very similar, within a year or so. As much good, I also think things were presented very poorly at that time too. I mean, think about, they brought Rico into the fold with that too. But why? So he could play the stereotype caricature for them as their manager.
Well, and they're on the other side.
Like, it almost felt like they needed to have that BS stereotype in there at some point.
Yeah.
And they did it in both divisions. They had Trish and Mickey James' little thing there, which they were playing up. They had the whole thing with Sable and Tori Wilson that was ridiculous. Like, it was all played on the women's side for.
Oh, they did it with Tori Wilson and Dawn Marie too.
Yeah, there was titillation for that side, and the other side it was comedy. Like, there was nothing about it that was substantive.
Well, and that was, that's a time, especially in that time in wrestling too, it was very much about playing into these kind of like fantasies and expectations of certain demographics, and so that it all kind of played into it because a lot of it were just stereotypes and gender roles. And I think it had to go through a lot of things in order to get to where we're at. And it's still not, perfect, but, compared to what it was even in the 2000s, it's the demographic of fans has spread out so much that the demographic of performers has been allowed to stretch, and people get out of being, whether it's their ethnicity, their gender, their sexuality, they get out of these stereotypical roles that they're forced to be into because, oh, this is how you look, or this is, how you are, this is what you can play these roles. Here's the list of characters that you can play. And I think that was a time where it was just like that was the expectation, and that was kind of what was selling. So I didn't feel like they needed to change anything.
The funny thing I want to ask also, Mikey and everybody else, have you noticed a difference in companies in modern day right now of how they accept or don't accept LGBTQIA plus wrestlers at this point? Because the perfect example we have recently is when they were trying to play up that like Harley Cameron is stupid in AEW and trying to hit on Anthony Bowens. He's gay, not as a derogatory thing, but like, you're an idiot, Harley Cameron. Don't you get this? Like, we support that. Same with Nyla Rose. Whereas I don't think I see that as much in WWE fans, or even like in like TNA fans also, weirdly, at least that I've watched, while they have some things there that might be a little more support, or there's just, they have wrestlers of that ilk, they don't support them the same way that AEW's fans do. Not that I want to get tribalistic about it. It just seems interesting.
Well, and I'll say, as someone who's recently started watching a lot of GCW, like, I mean, that is, I think, feels like that's the complete other side of the spectrum. Like, I mean, you're talking about a promotion that has Effie's Big Gay Brunch. There's, I mean, people watch this, and there are some of those performers who, that's a big part of their character, but it's not in, derogatory way, and they're using it proudly. And I think that's the biggest thing. And part of that is that the performers themselves get to create and be their characters. It's not being scripted by someone who doesn't understand it or isn't from that world. But you listen to the fans, and they're in it for the ride, for whether you're talking about someone who would have fit in as the, rough and tumble guy in the Attitude Era, whether it's a throwback to, the Golden Age, or we're talking about someone who's completely like, over the top, fantasy character or whatever. They're there and they follow along, and it's kind of nice to see that, because you see characters like Effie who plays for that, and everyone's having, and everyone loves it and has a great time with it, and they understand it, and it's something that we can enjoy both as entertainment, but it feels like people are it's more supported. And I don't know if it's because WWE is trying to be the Disney of professional wrestling. I mean, Disney has a lot of representation, but they do it very precisely. They'll show things, but they won't say it outright. WWE is kind of that way too.
It's almost like, and I compare the two, and I know it's not a fair competition, but WWE and then Tony Khan's whole, because it's AEW, ROH, and etc. It's almost like one is, they're both okay with it, they're both accepting of it, but one is embracing it, the other is kind of ignoring it. Because when with Tony Khan's promotion, we have Nyla Rose in there, we know about Diamante and Kira Hogan, Max Caster, a whole bunch of other ones, and then you think WWE is like, okay, well, we've got Sonya Deville, but she's injured.
Tegan Knox is one.
I didn't know that until right now. Same with Dakota Kai. I found that out pretty recently as well. But it's like, if we didn't see their personalities outside of the promotion, we wouldn't know.
Although I will say it's interesting, and this is another thing too, is so it's interesting. We just named a bunch of wrestlers in WWE, and they're all women. So that's one thing too, is it's always been women in this of this community who were accepted by people who didn't accept them before they were comfortable with men from the community. And so it's interesting that it kind of is that way, where it was like, for the longest time, the only people I could think of that were a part of the LGBTQ community that were professional wrestlers or athletes or anything like that was often women, because we didn't have a lot of men who were out, and unfortunately I think a large part of that is it was harder for them to come out, and they felt probably more pressure from the other men that were there. And it's still a very male dominated, business. So it is. And I think, Jesse, that's a fair comparison about, embracing versus ignoring.
I mean, you're to pull that thought a little bit further, pull on that thread, it kind of makes you think about how many wrestlers passed away so young that we would have, substance abuse or suicide or anything like that. I know for a fact that Chris Kanyon would be doing so much better and still with us if it was a culture of acceptance at that point.
Yeah, it's really interesting now that you bring it up when it comes to WWE, that a lot of the women are, out, but now there are a lot of men who are very vocal, like allies. Like the person that I immediately go to is Finn Balor. Finn Balor has always been open of being an ally and supporting and like being like that too. But yeah, if I'm looking at the current roster of WWE, I don't.
You never find out about it until after they leave. People like Orton, Fred Rosser, like folks like that, who they did their time under a gimmick, and that's what they were supposed to do in WWE, but they were told to suppress it, not even talk about it, unless it was a funny storyline, and then they're moved on from that, or whether there was just something in the backstage politics about it. Whereas I think nowadays, the hope is, especially in the new era and being as open as they can about it, you would think there'd be a few more people that'd be easier to come and be that, especially some of the newer folks in NXT coming up, where they can rock that as like their advocacy. But it still seems like there's just no way in that company for them to promote it well, and whether that's because of the background in it, if there's a standing rule we don't know about, something else, which makes me sad, because it's the major company everybody knows.
Yeah. Well, and you think about it, and you're like, I hate, and obviously this is a big topic that comes up during this month too, but you would think in the same vein of like the things that, other companies do, is like, that's a whole demographic that you could reach out to and get to watch your product, by allowing your wrestlers who fit into that demographic to be more open, so you can get you can attach more to those fans. Basically, it's the capitalistic approach to like, oh, hey, we can sell to you if we have things that target you.
Which they do with the women wrestlers. You look at Tegan Knox, Dakota Kai, all of them, they have like rainbow in their hair right now, or rainbow on their gear. Like there's a lot of that stuff they're working with. But I mean, I think the New Day have rainbow stuff on there as allies. They're doing that. And then like Finn Balor's obviously got the Balor Club stuff and everything that's rainbow, but not many other people are showcasing it.
Yeah. And especially not outside of being allies. It's more of that we don't have anyone that is actually a member of the community that's out there open, as opposed to some of the other promotions. And, I think part of that may be they don't want to go too hard into reaching one demographic and alienate other demographics, because unfortunately we still have people, and WWE is a big company that has a lot of fans who are like, and the smaller companies are able to be more open about that, and they do have a lot more interactions with independent wrestlers who, when they're out on the independent scene, they're able to be more open and be more who they are. And those companies also allow their performers to blur that line much more in kayfabe, and you can follow them on social media. And it's hard for people to hide their lives when they're sharing their lives on social media and then going and wrestling. But, this is who you are in your real life. And, we can learn that about you and like separate those things, but also understand like who you are as a person. And I think it's also, there's a lot of performers that I've grown to really like because of seeing them in their real lives.
Because it humanizes them.
Yeah, the things that they do, you see who they are, with the struggles that they have, and it makes me a big fan of them. And I think when you have people who are open like that, it allows your company to be more open, and accepting of that. And so we do have companies like AEW where we have people who are out and vocal about their lives, but the people running the show are not like, oh, cool, this is what you do in your personal life. Well, that's all you're going to do as your character in professional wrestling. I mean, like Nyla Rose is a great example. Nyla Rose in her personal life and in her in-ring character are very different. And we've seen some blending, especially with the comedy stuff that she does. But it's not like, there are certain aspects that are not just all that her character is. And it's great. I love the fact that, we can see performers like that because they're treated just like everybody else. Their personal lives don't dictate who they are in the ring. But yeah, it's something that I think we've seen more from the new companies, which is kind of nice. I just hope, like you said, JVL, that as we're heading into the supposed new era of WWE, that we can start opening up those things, and because they have a very large impact on the profession.
Yeah.
And just to go on your point, especially with Nyla Rose there, and talking about WWE having the kind of the old guard and a lot of their fans that want to rock the boat, but at some point you need to understand what you want your business to be about.
Well, and also with Gabby, I wonder also with that, are they going to run into the same problem in Oklahoma that they run into with Nyla Rose? Because she's completed her transition almost all the way through. And will they want to put themselves in that whole bucket of it, which is even worse because you have an amazing person who doesn't need much to get back in the ring. They're already ready to go and they could draw and be a great advocate out there. And you won't use them because of one controversial place in one state that's going to draw. I honestly wonder, you look at the smaller independents in other countries too. Do they have this type of issue that we have with ours here? You look at the European scene, the Japanese scene plays it up in Stardom quite a bit, but I don't see many other than being an effeminate character in a lot of NJPW or All Japan. It's really played more for stereotypes still, which is kind of crazy.
Well,
I mean, Gabby, for Christ's sake, she's a 2-time tag team champion, and we know the women's division desperately needs tag teams.
Well, and to counterpoint that is, yeah, WWE might struggle with issues that come up in a place like that. But at the same time, a company like WWE saying, if we can't come here with our performers, obviously, there's a lot of places I'd love if they said this too, because, I don't agree with where they go. But if they said hey, we can't come to your state with our performers and do our shows, then we're not going to bring our revenue to your state. That's going to have a huge impact on people that make that decision, because a lot of people make decisions based on the money that they're going to get. So they have the power to make more changes than some of the independent companies that might have to deal with that. But like you brought up, JVL, other countries like Mexico has, they have the Rudo and Technico, but they also have the Exotico, which has a huge history that role looks like as well. And so that's, another country that has had that as a big part of its history in wrestling. But, for a long time, they were the heel, or another version of a heel, and they were treated in a very stereotypical way. But in recent years, that's been trying to be changed, or at least seen differently. And I think that's it is something that's seen around the world. And even in New Japan, you had the Golden Lovers, and that whole played into that whole thing. And it was, so I think people are trying to tackle it in a way that fits into the world of professional wrestling for their different cultures, but it faces the same challenges that it faces outside of professional wrestling and in the rest of in the rest of our society and daily lives and all that kind of stuff. So
it's a microcosm.
Yeah, it's definitely a growing kind of topic when it comes to this. But to speak on, Andrew, what you said about lucha libre and the roles that our luchadors tend to fall into, when you brought up the exotic name that immediately came to mind, especially in Mexico lucha libre, and also given the Mexican culture in general, of how misogynistic it can be in certain aspects of it. But forefather, in my opinion, when it comes to lucha libre exotic, is Cassandro L, who is still wrestling and has a 30+ career in lucha libre. I'm gonna send a picture.
And the NWA and a bunch of other places. He's been everywhere.
Well, then there's
Like,
Escalante,
yep.
who I hadn't seen until Lucha Underground, and I think is still wrestling now at I think 50s or something like that. But yeah,
It's really, really, they can definitely do better when it comes to supporting their talent. But, you know, I'm more optimistic, but at the same time, I'm like, we can always do more. But, you know, since we're on the topic of talking about some of these wrestlers, there are a lot of individuals that have been named or just that are out there. And I want to talk about a couple of them. So we've talked about Nyla throughout Ring of Honor and AEW reviews in the past too. But she has one of my favorites because she's just no nonsense at this point. She's like, really? Okay, fine. You don't let me perform? I'm going to sell this t-shirt and we're going to donate it to a charity. Which I'm just like, Nyla's really good. And then I also want to shine some light on, you know, as two of the TNA folks are in here, I also want to give props to the quintessential diva herself, Miss Giselle, which is very interesting because Giselle only recently let it be public last year that she is a trans woman, that she came out as trans, and which is very interesting. I was like, oh yeah, I thought that was public knowledge, but apparently not. And it also changed my, well, I mean, I never liked the person that, you know, gave her grief at a wrestling convention. Andrew knows who I'm talking about because we covered this story the whole entire time, just how a certain Steiner was very disrespectful to her at a wrestling convention. And I'm just like, there's a reason why we don't like you. And now it's solidified it. I was like, okay, no, like, it makes me so mad. But, you know, that representation is important. I love Giselle and Nyla. Both of them, I think, have kind of stepped into the limelight. But I would like to hear what some of your guys' favorite, past or present, that you're kind of like, who you are enjoying in terms of this representation. Because I have a couple on the list, but I'll get to later. But
well, I will say one of my favorite is, I mean, I wore the shirt today, is Max the Impaler, especially because right when I started following Max was right when they were, you know, kind of discovering, you know, their non-binary nature. And so when I had started following Max, they hadn't yet, you know, moved into using they them pronouns. And I was just a huge Max the Impaler fan as soon as I saw their work and everything. So, you know, getting to see someone kind of discover themselves, especially as an instructor and in theater, you know, working with a lot of students who are kind of going through that journey as well. It was something cool to see someone go through that and discover that about themselves and be open and, you know, kind of have that willingness to share that, especially on social media, and have that kind of presence, you know. And we've seen a lot more people, especially this year, come out, like, you know, Mike Bailey, is it Bronson from Iron Savages,
Bronson,
who just came out this year,
yeah,
like at the start of the month.
So, you know, there's been a few people out there also now recently getting into GCW. I really enjoy, you know, the work that some of the folks there do, like Effie and Ali Catch, and especially as Effie is kind of one of the pillars for that promotion, and he got taken away by the White Six. But, you know, I think there's a lot of folks out there that are a part of that community that don't get recognized by, you know, the general fans, but some of the more, I don't even want to say hardcore fans, but the people who look outside of the two big companies. And I love the fact that we're at a place where, like, Fred Rosser, I didn't know who Fred Rosser was, and then he showed up in Ring of Honor, and to have commentary just like openly talk about it, and not in some like, oh, hush hush way or some special way or whatever. They're just like, here's who this person is, and we're going to tell you who they are. You know, it's nice to be at that point. And the last one I want to talk about is just because I saw them on the list, and I saw some recent news, but Edith Surreal, who recently announced that they'll no longer be wrestling due to concussion issues, which is a super bummer. And they were someone who I saw, what was it? Apricots and Still Life, I think was their original ring name. And then became Edith Surreal. You know, that was a bummer to hear about someone who had, you know, put in a lot of work and been really kind of, you know, defining themselves to have to step away from something that they really enjoy. But I think it's great that we're at a point where there's so many folks out there in so many different profession or promotions that not only get to do this thing that they love, but they also get to be people who can be open about who they are, so that hopefully the next generation of fans that want to be able to get into this profession can see like, oh, hey, not only can I get into this, but I can get into it and I don't have to hide who I am. Like, they can have heroes for multiple things. And I think representation is good, not just for the people that are like you, but also so that people who are not like you can still see you as a hero. Like, you don't have to look up to someone who is exactly like you. And I think it's great that we have professional wrestlers who can be looked up to by fans that are not necessarily in the same community. And that's how we get people who are going to support and be allies to those people.
Yeah, there's just so many. Like, I mean, I'll go first. I have a couple on my list too. When I wanted to create this list, I wanted to not only include some of the wrestlers that are still wrestling today, but I wanted to dig deep into like the history of, as much as I could find when it comes to this kind of topic. And the first name that I want to talk about really quick, because I just found her story very interesting, is dating back all the way to the 1960s, Miss Sandy Parker. Sandy Parker was a Black lesbian woman in the 1960s of professional wrestling, especially in the States and in Canada, and just how the times were a lot, especially, when you look up the fact that we're in the midst of political landscape and changes and all that stuff. And just being a wrestler, she would go on to wrestle around the world and retire in the 1980s. And she stated that she retired because wrestling became too commercialized for her liking. So she's like, I'm good. I've had like a 20+ career. We're good to go. So I'm like, Miss Sandy Parker, I love you. But of course, I got to mention some of my personal faves. The one that I immediately had to, just because I love her so much. And we saw her at Bound for Glory last year, was Miss Sunny Kiss. I love Sunny Kiss so much. And I am mad that AEW did not utilize her to the best of her ability. It's so frustrating, but I love Sunny, and the fact that, like in the same vein as Effie, is not afraid to be unapologetically themselves, in both in their presentation and their ring. I still think Sunny's match versus Trinity was one of my highlights, because I'm like, I want that match. Give it to me more and more times. But I love Sunny. Some other ones that, I could think of, Kid Bandit on the independent scene as well is also really, really important. Of course, I got to go with my boy Speedball, Mike Bailey, non-binary representation. Mike Bailey and his partner, Veda Scott, both non-binary representation. The fact that they get to travel together to do all these things is kind of great. I want that relationship. But I have to also talk about my first introduction way back before wrestling, when I was watching, I think it was a documentary of some sort with Evolve, when that company was still around too. One of the OG staples of there who, saw a short YouTube documentary about is Mike Paro. Also goes by Para on the independent scene too. I was just like, yep, there we go. That is your gay representation right there too. It's, again, I find it interesting that the independent scene are more comfortable with having this conversation when you don't have companies and other things to worry about. But that's just some of my list. Those are a lot of people, but there are many others that, I can go all day talking about. Mercedes Martinez, as we know too. Like,
I mean, there's really almost everyone has been covered as far as I can tell. The two ones for me that I made sure I wanted to talk about was, as Andrew talked about, was Chris Canyon. I was a WCW kid, and I know the later years were not great, especially with the Russo era and Eric Bischoff coming back with the silver hair. But he still did some really good work as part of that triad with him, DDP, and Bam Bam Bigelow, which is just a hell of a team. Even as Mortis, I liked him. I think he still doesn't get the credit that he deserves, and it's sad that he wasn't able to come out in any kind of safe space until after he finished wrestling. The other one that I think is important that I think we've all glossed over is because they did come out as bisexual, even though they're married, which I really like, because it shows that, hey, just because poof, you're married and a traditional cis couple doesn't mean that, oh, all of a sudden that, no, I'm only looking at this person. It's Tony Storm. I looked at Storm coming out as a bisexual a couple of years ago.
Definitely. I mean, and again, you bring them up in this right now, Jesse, where they're having a storyline going on, which is playing up that aspect of it as well, which is harkening back weirdly to that time beforehand. It's kind of a little weird with them and Mariah and Mina Shirakawa and seeing that stuff. So again, that feels kind of weird that she's allowing them to kind of play that up, but it's also been like put out there with Saraya coming out as bisexual as well, and all those other people in that kind of whole ring of people at AEW. And to speak to Andrew's thing earlier about Fred Rosser, the reason why it's been such a known thing is that right before he was fired as Darren Young from WWE, he came out in the locker room, and there was speculation that because he finally did that and was starting to like push to be, I'd like a push here, I'd like to be wrestling, that type of stuff. That's why they wouldn't say it out loud, but that was part of the reason they let him go, was they didn't want the controversy around him in the room with it. So it's sad to hear that like it took him getting out of the big machine to be able to be recognized. As everyone said, there's a lot that have been covered here already. I mean, I'm second Abaddon at this point, being able to watch them evolve from their original gimmick in their small independent things, yet still holding on to it for their own thing as well, and like owning like the Living Dead girl and stuff like that, and the monster from the Black Hills. Meeting them in person, also getting to talk to them about that and that representation was really, really cool. And how they were very worried as they jumped to the bigger scene, that as they were finding themselves, would this be okay? And they found a lot of solace in their personal life and who's around them and the partner they keep. Same thing with Layla Hirsch, who, has been really out there and out and straight since she's not straight, she's queer, she's a lesbian, but out there, representing and being nothing but a badass. The modern age has given us that. And people like Sawyer Wreck, who is in GCW, basically queen of the death match out there that you would think of, and she's out there killing it like that. Or you look at the newer up and coming people that are really independent freelancers like Succubus, who's on TikTok and everything else, and coming out saying they're queer and all that type of stuff. And I hearken back to this as well. Like, there's still some people that, while in their personal lives they might be out farther, don't want it to color their character, like Dalton Castle. He's said, my real life, my real name, I've been an out gay man since I was 31. For 31 years, I've been out like that for so long. Meanwhile, I will never tell you what Dalton Castle's sexuality is. That's not integral to as a character as I perform him. Yes, you can guess. Yes, you can make speculation, but I will never say it because that is not me. That is the character. And so where is that difference now that we see that in a lot of these things too, is like, do folks want to use that as leverage in their character to get over now? Because a lot of them are not doing that. Like, it's not a thing they're trying to do, except weirdly in the Toni Storm vortex right now in that women's division, where it's being played up again and again, not handled well by writers, by people in a room. It's all because it's a soap opera, because wrestling is stereotypes beyond stereotypes beyond stereotypes. You can't honestly put it on there and be respectful of it if you're going to play it up to 11. And how do we feel? I don't know how we feel about that in terms of we support a product as fans where our community is being reduced on screen still to stereotypes, but we can still appreciate the people that are there doing good work that are not using that to get over.
Well, that actually leads into what I wanted to discuss next, which is the current challenges that we continue to see when it comes to all this. So let's just bring this up because I have made my feelings, and poor JVL has been on the receiving end of these said feelings when it comes to the last month or two that we've done the Mariah May and Toni Storm and Mina Shirakawa stuff. Like, it all stemmed, what was it, like a month and a half, 2 months ago, where Mina was doing a small stint in AEW before going back to Japan. And so she and Mariah were reunited as part of Club Venus, which I loved. And then afterwards, they just randomly start making out. I'm like, what?
But you back that up even farther, Mike. You go back to when Toni won the title again. And you had the whole kiss with Saraya during the Outcast. Like, that at Wembley, or not even, that was All In. Out of nowhere, that was the distraction there. And that's where this kind of started with this whole thing surrounding it.
I'm like, I made my feelings very clear because I was like, okay, that's kind of weird, but all right, let's see what happens. And then they continue to do it the next week, and then the other following week, and then the week after that. And then JVL had heard me bring this up, and I was beating a dead horse at this point. I was like, I don't like this because this is giving me shades of not being handled properly, and I don't know, and I don't feel great about the direction of it. And again, it always plays into this weird like gender fantasy thing that a lot of the society tends to have too. It's just like, oh my gosh, two girls are kissing, that's amazing. I was like, what is happening? Like, what are we doing?
Well, I think like you said, it does play into a historically poorly handled trope. But I think even when you look at any time that they dive too much into the hypersexualization in professional wrestling, it gets you're playing into a kind of fantasy setting that can get kind of uncomfortable, or you're getting into something that's just so ridiculous it's just not believable. And I think that can happen even with straight characters. The problem with this is you have that, plus you have the history of that being just in and of itself being hypersexualized, you know. And so if they were playing this like they were playing it as in, you know, someone who's being manipulative of someone who's genuinely interested in them, or two people who are genuinely interested in each other, or if it's an actual love triangle and you treat it the same way you would treat any kind of story like that, not making it this like, ooh, two girls, or in this case multiple. I think it's the being genuine that is the important thing, and when it's being overdone, it just runs too much of it. It's too easy for it to just not be handled properly.
Lest we forget too, like in the same vein of this, like way back in the day too, underneath a certain other management with WWE too. Lest we forget the Lana and Liv Morgan, are they lesbian? I was so upset because, you know, Bobby Lashley and Lana were about to get married in like storyline purposes, and Rusev got involved, which was really weird. And then Liv came back from injury. I was like, oh, cool, this is gonna be awesome. Like Liv and Lana can start fighting and whatnot. And then it's like, I object to this wedding. I was like, okay, there's a little bit of history there. So she's like, this is stupid. Lana is like lying to you, whatever. And she's like, Bobby, I have to tell you something. Me and Lana are lovers. And as soon as she said that, I was just like, I turned off my television immediately. People forget that Liv and Lana had to deal with that storyline. And then it got dropped like a couple of weeks later because, you know, the backlash, people are like, this is stupid.
Whereas you look at recently, and this was played because it was Honest playing, all the stuff from the house show circuit before Rhea Ripley went on an injury, where she starts doing the stink face and Shayna Baszler's like moving Nia out of the way to like get in and get it done. Like that's hysterical. And that's because that's her being honest and playing that to 11, not lascivious.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, I'm a lesbian. I'd enjoy this. And then doesn't happen. And then Nia ends up doing it to her. Like that's
the house shows are wild.
Oh my
like,
God.
they are wild for sure. But yeah, I'm just like, why can't we do this? Oh, okay. Well, on that little note, and then let's just dive deep into this. I brought this up earlier too, like not even like creative wise, but also my biggest issue when it comes to the challenges that these wrestlers face is also the challenges of like the old guard and certain legends in business that are very narrow-minded and kind of, you know, we're far enough into this. Yeah, they are assholes when it comes to this. And again, I want to talk more into depth about Giselle Shaw interaction. Like she came out last year during Pride, and then she was at a wrestling convention, and I'm going to name his name because I don't support this man anymore. And it's unfortunate that a certain WWE wrestler shares blood with this person, but just the amount of verbal abuse and very transphobic and just mistreatment from Rick Steiner to Giselle Shaw at a wrestling convention, I'm just like, I hate you. Like, I already didn't like you, and now I'm not going to support you even further. And it sucks because you have one of your blood in WWE right now who I like, but, you know, there's that issue. It's like the sins of the father can't be passed to the sins of the child. But, like, yeah, Rick Steiner was an asshole for his treatment to Giselle Shaw. She took it in stride, but I'm just like, that is messed up. How dare you do that? I'm just like, and then when we talk about it too, like, since we're talking about TNA too, just like the presentation and how they handled Orlando Jordan in TNA during the Bischoff and Hulk Hogan Dixie Carter management era was just, it was not great. I was so upset. I was just like, what are we doing? Just people.
Well, I think it's, you know, I think the problem is that, like JVO, you said it great, it's a microcosm, because so you have people who believe in these certain things, or like, oh, it was better this time, or like people should only do these things or whatever. And well, you know, we saw people like, you know, Nyla getting, you know, harassed by fans. And then we also saw someone like Sky Blue being harassed by fans. So it shows you that there's also just these people who are just going to be small-minded. They're going to be outdated. They're going to think that they have certain privilege or whatever to be able to get away with this stuff, to treat people this way, to exclude people from certain things. And unfortunately, they're by bringing in people who were often marginalized into a bigger spotlight, that means that there are going to be some times when those people who get angry at the thought of that are going to interact with them. So I think the biggest thing that we can hope is that that group of people who are going to do that are going to get smaller, and the people who are going to stand up against that is going to get bigger. And I feel like, the fact that, places like TNA treat Giselle the way that they do, and AEW and Ring of Honor with Nyla, and just all of their wrestlers, the way that the wrestlers themselves treat each other, the way that backstage production, treat them, it's getting more of that support out there. And so I hope that we just get to see people more and more stand up to that. And it'd be nice if, this does happen, that when we have these older wrestlers, especially, that come out and say these stupid things, that other older wrestlers come up and call them on it. Whether it's that situation with Giselle or Goldberg's, stupid thoughts on people breaking his record and things like that. And
it probably ended at Goldberg's stupid thoughts.
Well, yeah. I mean, you run into a ring post so many times that it's going to mess with your head.
You also have the old guard, Andrew, where they're not apologizing and they're kind of dodging. Like, you look at Undertaker talking about this recently when he was asked about the whole Chris Canyon thing, that why did you beat him up so bad? Was it because he was gay? And all Undertaker says, well, I didn't know he was gay. And no, it can't be that. It was never about that. When there were reports from backstage that this was a receipt from Vince through him, and he was more than happy to do it. This is a man also who worked with one of the most repulsive people in the world, who's the Knox County mayor now, that I don't want to talk about, who has come out completely in standing in political zones against folks of this community and saying that people that don't have rights. So I don't know if half of them believe it right now. The new guard has to be the ones that basically says, shut up, you're gone. We appreciate what you did for the sport, but you need to be quiet. Like, shut your mouths.
Well, I hope, I hope people, like, the first one that always comes to my mind is someone like Billy Gunn. He's worked so close with, groups like The Acclaimed and stuff like that in AEW. And there's a few of them that are out there that seem like they're genuinely trying to help new performers come up in a variety of ways, that you would hope that when you work that close with people, that you're getting to learn who those people are, and if you weren't already accepting beforehand, that helps you understand more and maybe changes your thought process, or that you already had that thought process and that's why you're willing to work with people who have the talent to be there, and you support them in who they are. So I hope that even if it's few and far between from the generation that we grew up with, I hope that some of those people will stand up and, say things and stand up for the people that, they're mentors to.
Well, and I think the other thing that also kind of is helping change that trajectory, like using Billy Gunn as an example, working so close with Anthony Bowens and everything as well. I think what also helps is that these, I say newer wrestlers, but I'm going to put the category of like less than 10 years in the business. Like, they're still building their stuff up. They're more open and they're more vocal about pushing back against like these old state of mentalities. Like, and this is just my observation when we were at, Wrestle show in New Jersey too, on that second day, like my heart filled with so much happiness of how much I look forward to the future of wrestling, because day two was pretty much a lot of these wrestlers that have less than 10 years of experience in the business, but they use their platforms and they're just very vocal. And also happens because they're on the younger side. So Sky Blue, Kyle Fletcher, Layla Hirsch, Queen Aminata, Billy Stark, like all these folks who are growing up in this day and age of, the more social and political movement that is supporting and standing up and pushing back against, the old established ways and things that have happened. It gives me a lot of hope too. And I know that's pretty much a lot of the ROH talent, but I'm just saying, man, like it helps that there are folks that are within that less than 10 years experience who are not afraid to the don't give a F attitude about anything. they're just like, nah, you're a turd. We ain't here for this.
I wonder if some of that too is that because the way that things have changed in the business, that those younger performers, they're coming up with each other through the independents, working in certain companies and then going off to new companies, or just the fact that they're allowed to cross brand lines. They're allowed to be like, hey, I wrestle for this company, but my best friend wrestles for this other company, or this group of people I hang out with wrestle for, all different companies. There's not this sense like, oh, you can't hang out with them because they wrestle for the enemy kind of a thing. And so it enables them to build a community of professional wrestling, not a community of a promotion.
That's a very good point.
I mean, we're in an age where everyone knows everyone and has worked with everyone and will have found some way to, and the bigger realms are finally acknowledging that now instead of that, so that you have to actually take into effect these people, not just these characters, even when you rename them, redo what they're going to mean, because they, like real people, have history and are part of an identity. Weird, isn't it? That we have to respect people's identities.
Who knew? That's wild in this day and age. Well, I think the thing for me too is that growing up in this day and age in 2024 with wrestling, with so much that's out there and all the representation that we get to. And this goes back to my little mission statement when we created this version of BC WrestlePod. It's just like, I didn't know who was going to be involved in it. It originally just started with a group of 5 of us. Now it's expanded to there's a total of 9 of us that all range within the community, whether we are very strong allies or, we are part of the community ourselves. Literally, we have a bunch of allies. We have 2 representations that are the B in the acronym. And then, of course, unfortunately, I wished Will was here, but he is our G. And I was like, we're doing a follow-up because I want his perspective. I really do.
We're keeping the gays down right now is what we're doing, honestly. He just doesn't want to be here
Don't
with us.
say that.
Don't clip that. Don't, but still.
It's in here now. It's on the line stream.
We just relegate him to TNA and don't let him talk about other wrestling, and
And Will, I can share this because Will has given me permission to do so, but I would love his take on this because, again, Will is a fan who watched wrestling in the crump of the 70s and the 80s, and then he's just recently come back to it, within the last year or so, thanks to BC WrestlePod and being a part of what we do here too. And
which is why we would have loved his perspective on this one, because he knows everything from the 70s and 80s that we didn't know.
I know. This is like, damn it. Well, we are going to do a follow-up. I want to do a part 2 with him, and if anybody else wants to join in too.
And we're not allowed to. If Will's there, we're not allowed to be there.
Hey, I'm the boss, and I say we're doing it. Okay, I override everyone. But,
Did you hear that, Jesse? You've been overridden.
Okay.
Be like, Jesse is our HR, so I'm like, sorry. Oh, my goodness.
He's documenting all of this.
He literally is. He's writing notes down to be like, okay, this was an infraction here.
Yeah.
Make sure
This is just filling out a few CMA documents.
No.
Oh, God.
Goodness. I think on that lovely note, gentlemen, this has been a very fun conversation, and obviously this is not going to be the only time we bring this conversation up, because we bring it up pretty much in every review we do when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I appreciate you gentlemen being here this evening, and this is a topic I really wanted to do in the spirit of Pride Month, but also because I feel that, again, given the platform that we have and, we're slowly growing in everything, I really don't see any other, folks dissect and talk about these things. So I want to give credence to the voice that doesn't necessarily get the most representation when it comes to professional wrestling. So thank you for being here, boys. Before we log off for the evening, any final thoughts, statements, anything at all? The floor is yours. Anything. Sweet.
Watch
Okay.
GCW.
Yo, honestly, okay. We'll talk offline in our business meeting. I already have the plan written up. We'll talk about it. But that is gonna be it for us here for this month's episode. Tune in next month where we also talk about something really, really fun. We're going to talk about the feuds that could have been, and we're going to talk about feuds that kind of just went womp womp and how we would fix the feuds and wish that they were a lot better. So we're going to be dream booking and doing all that kind of stuff. We got some fun stuff planned. It's going to be great. But from all of us here at the BC WrestlePod, remember, take care of yourself, love one another, stay Bi-Conic, and especially, not just in this month alone, but every single day, you always deserve to finish your stores. But until then, Adios, sayonara, and tata for now. Billy Stark's outro.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another Vibe Tribe production. What's gonna happen next time? Well, you're gonna have to tune in to find out. But until then, remember, take care of yourself, love one another, and as always, make sure that you keep the good times rolling. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.